caliber. I feel a bit like Zsa Zsa Gabor's eighth husband. I know what I'm supposed to do, I'm just not sure how to make it interesting. I do want to thank Galani for having me here. I love Spoken Interludes. This is one of my favorite events. I've done it multiple times, but never in New York. This does seem very similar to the Beverly Hills event, except with more real body parts and less Scientology. So I think to remedy that, I'll be handing out some informational pamphlets after the show. This also marks the first time that my lawyer, my agent, several of my college roommates, and my family are in the same place at the same time, which is mildly disconcerting. There's a very dangerous information exchange going on. But it is nice to have my kids here. My oldest daughter, when she was 4, we were talking about what we do for a living. And we said, what does Mommy do for work? And Rosie said, she teaches college. And we said, right, and what does Daddy do? And she said, and she thought for a while, and she said, he goes to the gym? So that made me feel really good about myself. And when my youngest was around the same age, we asked her also what we do for work. And she said, Mommy teaches college. We said, right, and what does your daddy do? And she said, he writes books. A flush of pride. And my wife said, what kind of books? To which Natalie replied, boring books. So perhaps that explains my delight in being here tonight. I finally have an opportunity to exceed expectations. And I also like the seating arrangements here. You're the most captive audience I've ever had. No one's going anywhere. So we're going to read for 4.5 hours. Trust Known is my 9th book, or to phrase it slightly differently, it took me 8 books to get here and to write this one. This is the kind of story that I loved the most growing up. When I was a kid, I was not allowed to watch TV except 1, if the Red Sox were playing. Sorry. Or 2, if there was a Hitchcock movie on. And I love those everyman stories. North by Northwest, Cary Grant is the wrong guy in the wrong place, Jimmy Stewart looking out the wrong damn window from his wheelchair. And I've always felt like those characters stand in for that little part in all of us, who at times when we're tired or stressed or back on our heels, feel like we're a fraud. Like we're not up to some relationship that we're in, or a job, or some set of circumstances. And if you take that feeling and you magnify it by about 1,000, you'll have a pretty good sense of how Nick Horrigan, my protagonist, feels at the opening of Trust No One. And so with this book, for the first time, I think I wrote the kind of story that I grew up with, that I love the most to watch and to read. And I paired it with a very different take for me on a thriller. I'm married now, I've got kids of my own, and I'm concerned less in my own life with super cops and forensics and much more with my family and the specific ways that having a family makes you more vulnerable. And this to me is really a story that's about family, about the family that Nick Horrigan had taken away from him as a teenager. And we're going to meet him at the book's opening when he's 35 years old now. And there's always a moment for me when the idea for a book first occurs. And I'm an insomniac, so generally that's between about 2 and 4 in the morning. And this particular morning I was lying in bed in the dark next to my wife. And I thought, what is the worst thing that can happen right now? That's sort of the perennial thriller writer's question. And to answer that question, I'm going to read the opening chapter. I snapped awake at 2:18 a.m., the bloodshot numerals staring at me from the nightstand. For years on end, I woke up at this exact same time every night, regardless of what time zone I was in. But after 17 years, I had started sleeping through the night. I'd finally outrun the old fears, or so I convinced myself. Remote sirens warbled in the night. At first, I thought they were in my head, the soundtrack to the dream. But the distant wail got louder instead of fading. I hadn't awakened on my own. I blinked hard, inhaled, and looked around. Stained lemon-pledged scent of my third-floor condo, my sweat imprint on the sheets and pillow, breeze rattling palm fronds on my balcony in the next room, and a watery blue light undulating across the bedroom ceiling. I sat up. The TV across the room on the steamer trunk was off, but the distant sirens continued. And then, along with the light on the ceiling, the sirens abruptly stopped. I threw off the sheets and pattered across the carpet. In my plaid pajama bottoms, I ventured into the all-purpose living room, heading for the balcony. The police lights had flickered through the locked sliding glass door. Halfway to it, I froze. A thick, black nylon rope was dangling from the lip of the roof, its end coiled on my balcony, motionless. No longer groggy, I opened the sliding glass door and stepped silently onto the balcony, rolling the screen door shut behind me. My balcony, with its Brady Bunch orange tiles, overlooked a narrow Santa Monica street populated by other generic apartment buildings. Streetlights were sporadic. I confronted the rope for a quiet moment, then looked around, expecting who knows what. Bulky shadows of cars lined the gutters. An SUV was double parked, blocking the street. No headlights, no dome light, tinted windows, but a huff of smoke from the exhaust pipe. A sedan, dark and silent, wheeled around the turn and halted, idling behind the SUV. Terror reached through 17 years and set my nerves tingling. I squinted to see if I could make out a police light bar mounted on either roof. In my peripheral vision, the tail of the rope twitched. The roof creaked. Before I had a chance to think, a spotlight blazed up from the SUV, blinding me. A zippering sound came from above, so piercing that my teeth vibrated. Then a dark form pendulum down at me, 2 boots striking me in the chest. I left my feet, flying back through the screen and ripped free almost soundlessly. I landed on my shoulder blades, hard, the wind knocked out of me. The black-clad figure, outfitted with a SWAT-like jumpsuit and assault rifle, filled the screen frame with its bits of torn flesh. Even through the balaclava, the guy looked somehow sheepish. He hadn't seen me beneath the overhang before he jumped. "Shoot," he said. "Sorry." He made an expert landing despite the collision and was aiming the rifle at my face. I guppied silently, a knot of cramped muscles still holding my lungs captive, and rolled to my side. He stepped astride me as I curled around the hot pain in my chest. A hammering of boots in the hall matched my heartbeat, so forceful it jarred my vision, and then the front door flew directly at me, knocked from the hinges and deadbolt as if a hurricane had hit the other side. It skipped on end, landed flat on the carpet with a lump, and slid to within an inch of my nose. As I writhed between the assailant's boots, fear gave way to panic. 3 men flipped me and proned me out, my face mashing carpet, front tooth driving into my bottom lip. Gloved hands ran up my sides, checking my ankles, my crotch. More black-clad forms hurtled through the doorway, aiming assault rifles in all directions, a few men streaking off to the bedroom. "Nick Horrigan. Are you Nick Horrigan?" My chest released, and I finally drew in a screeching breath. And another. I rolled onto my back, stared up at the one face not covered by a hood and goggles. Lean, serious features, slender nose bent left from a break, gray hair shoved back from a side part. "Are you Nick Horrigan?" I nodded, still fighting to draw in a proper breath. A warm, salty trickle ran from my split lip down my chin. The other men, 15 of them, had spread through the condo, dumping drawers, knifing open the couch cushions, overturning chairs. "Nick Horrigan, born 6/12/73, son of Agent Frank Durant." "Stepson," I managed. He shoved a photograph in my face. A man, shown from the chest up, wearing a blue blazer and the scowl of the unphotogenic. A wide mouth and slack lips lent him a slightly wild quality. "What's the last contact you had with this man?" "I don't know this guy," I said. The photo moved abruptly in front of my nose again. "Then you've been in phone or email contact with him." "I told you," I said. "I don't know who the hell he is." The boss swiveled to face a guy wandering the kitchen with a magnetometer. The guy shook his head. "Sorry, Mr. Wydell." "Okay." Wydell ran a hand through his gray hair. It fell back precisely into the side part. "Okay, get him a t-shirt." A t-shirt flew from the vicinity of my bedroom, hitting me in the head. "Put this on, let's go." My Pac-Man shirt. Great. I tugged it on and 2 guys hoisted me to my feet. Let's go, Wydell said. "You got sneakers, something?" I stopped moving and the 2 men commanding me to the door stumbled into me. "What do you think I did?" I asked. Someone handed him my sneakers and he thumped them against my chest. He hustled me out to the hall, 1 agent in front of us, another behind, a man at each side. They held a diamond formation as we barreled toward the stairs. I stumbled down, trying to keep pace, nearly dropping my sneakers. The lobby was empty, save the vinyl couches and smoky mirrors, and beyond the street was lit up like day. Police cars, spotlights, men in dark suits talking into their wrists. A few spectators, hastily dressed, stood on the opposite sidewalk, straining on tiptoes, waiting to see who would emerge. We burst through the doors and stopped. I hopped on 1 foot, then the other, pulling on my Pumas. "Cut the goddamn spotlights," Wydell said. "This isn't a fashion shoot." The spotlights clicked off with a bass echo, and suddenly the night was darker than it should have been. Wydell grabbed the arm of another agent. "Where is it?" "Almost here. It needs to be here now." I said loudly, "Are you going to tell me what the hell is going on?" All of a sudden, a deep thrumming filled the night, as much a vibration as a sound, and then a Steven Spielberg glow came over the rooftops, turning the palms a fiery yellow. On the sidewalk, a little girl white-knuckled her father's hand, her mouth open in sleepy disbelief. A Blackhawk loomed into view, massive and somehow futuristic in this context, on my street. The wind from the rotors buffeted the crowd, snapped at the bushes, pasted my clothes to me. Wydell's tie pulled clear of his jacket and stood on end. The helicopter banked and set down magisterially on the asphalt. The spectators stared at me in expectation. Wydell grabbed my arm in a vice grip and started moving me toward the helicopter. The sight of that waiting Black Hawk finally broke me out of shock, or at least helped me catch up to myself, to what was happening. I jerked free. Wait a minute, you can't just take me. What's happening here? I had to follow him closely, to hear his words over the noise of the rotors. He was shouting. A terrorist has penetrated the nuclear power plant at San Onofre and is threatening to blow it up. I felt the sudden hollowness at my core, that rushing emptiness I'd felt only twice before, clutching stupidly at Frank while he died and watching live footage as that second plane hit the tower. Okay, I said, Jesus, but what's it got to do with me? Wydell stopped, poised, one leg up on the skid of the chopper. He says he'll only talk to you. Does anyone have any questions? Questions from afar?
So what happened?
Yeah. So what happens next? What happens next is you go buy the book. And then I sign it. And it all goes downhill from there. Yes.
What did they have come in and ask nicely?
Because they have come in and asked nicely. No, Mom, they couldn't know. Yes.
Did any of those movies that you mentioned earlier, those wonderful movies, really, Wolverine, Hitchcock, did they play any part of the influence on to write?
Yes. Those she asked if the movies I mentioned earlier that Hitchcock had an influence on me to want to write. And yes, I think it was the pairing of two things. It was watching so much Hitchcock that this book, I love how their narratives about paranoia. I mean, it's so interesting, and about average people stuck in extraordinary circumstances. And I think a lot of the times, one of the ways that I think of the thrillers that I'm writing now is you meet a guy who's an ordinary person, but you're meeting them on the worst day of their life. And that had an influence. And I think what also had an influence is the fact that I wasn't allowed to watch any TV except for that. So I just read all the time. I read everything in the library except I drew the line that Nancy drew. There was no Nancy. Yeah.
So I'm curious how you bought your books. Do you have the whole story kind of come to you all at once, or do you find that it kind of emerges slowly?
I'm the worst person to ask this because for me, my books, they all come differently and are unmanageable in different ways, like children. And so they're all different. I've had books where I have a really strong sense of the whole shape of it before I start. Generally, I will know the first several chapters. I'll know the starting dilemma, and it usually has a pretty strong ethical basis to it. Like there's some worst of two choices decision my protagonist has to take, and I have a rough sense of the shape of the rest of it. I mean, I at least have that. But a lot of times, one thing I found, I've overplotted before, and I find that I get really bored if I know everything that's going to happen already. And I need to leave room when I'm writing characters to leave enough room once they start talking and leave enough room for the plot that it can still grow and change. Because once I'm into it, you can't forecast everything that's going to happen that's going to feel right. Any other questions?
Were you mad at your parents that they didn't let you watch TV?
Furious. I wasn't allowed to eat sugar cereal either or play video games, so like I'd go over to friends' houses and watch Tom and Jerry eat Fruit Loops, and don't talk to me. We're not playing. It's Tom and Jerry hour. Yeah, it was miserable. Not that I harbor any resentment anymore or anything go on. It's all fine now.
Because we're doing that to Walter and Lucian, so, I mean, a little, they watch some, but, so.
Yeah, we let our
they'll call you, yeah.
They'll call me, yeah. We can have, I have therapy every Tuesday. We can write them into the group. Yes?
Do you ever get scared of your own stories?
Do I ever get scared of my own stories? No, but I will have dreams a lot. This is what's really weird. My dreams are what's really weird. I've had dreams before where I'm having a nightmare and I will stop in the middle of the nightmare and rewind it so that I can play the reveal in a way that's more scary for myself and I have a nightmare. That's been freaky. Where literally I'll wake up and I'll have figured out some way to scare myself more. And the other thing, and the nerdiest nightmare I ever had was one time I was in the middle of just a horrific period of editing, and I had a nightmare where I was dreaming in Microsoft Word, and I was like cutting and pasting. And that was pretty bad. That was a dark time. Yeah.
So, Mitch Hackman is almost every one of his movies. Are you in your book?
No, I'm not in my book. But there's one motif that I put in all of my books. But somebody has to discover them and know what they are. I don't know if anyone yet has put out, but there's one image I put in every single one of my books. Yes, in the back.
Have any of your books been optioned for movies?
Have any of your books been optioned? Yes, I adapted one of my books for Paramount. I do some screenwriting, and I also do some writing for Marvel. I write comics as well from time to time. And so I adapted a book of mine, my fourth book called The Kill Clause for Paramount. That's, circling in perennial development. So I've done some stuff on that end as well. Yes?
Is this your first Nick Horrigan book, or is this?
Yes, this is a standalone, and part of that is going with that meet a, ordinary character on the worst day of his life. Like, there's only so many of those you can do with the same character before people start catching on. The rest is pretty much like you turn into Angela Lansbury in that small town. You're like, how many people are going to die in that town? Like, everyone has died. The population is 30, and 97 people died due to syndication. So, yeah, I started back and moved into standalones. What did I major in? I was undergrad, I was English and psychology, and then did a master's because I needed something really practical to enter the job force, so I did a master's in Shakespeare and tragedy. And then people were like beating down the door to me. My summer jobs were the worst because I went home and everywhere, where I went to college, everyone had incredibly impressive summer jobs, so they were off like advising Russia about how to restabilize their economy, and I went home and was like a valet parker. Nothing I can do. So, yeah. Or I had one job where I literally had to, I was working construction on firehouses, right? My house would like burn down but be partially standing, and I have to go in with a mask and a sledgehammer and like knock down and wheelbarrow it out, and it was literally me and like convict release workers. And I get back to school in the fall, and everyone said, well, what did you do? Like, I did an internship with Janet Reno, and Amnesty International, and so that's where my strong urge to write fiction emerged, I think, to hide my humiliation at the base summer jobs that I endured year after year. Anyone else have another question, or you just want somebody else?
What are you working on now, Greg?
What am I working on now? My next book is going to be called They're Watching. And that is, it's kind of my homage to Rear Window.
That's fun.
And that will be out next summer, which I'm very excited about, and doing a bit more comic stuff for Marvel, which is really fun. It's kind of like the kid who lives up the street from you has all the best toys, and you get to go over to his house and play with his toys. That's what working for Marvel's like. Because you get anything in the sandbox, and so that's been really fun. And I like it also because it's instant production, as opposed to the Hollywood or the the TV or the feature end where things are in development forever. With comics, basically, the minute that you finish them, you start getting art in from all around the world. So that's really fun. Yes.
Come back to New York and read to us in September.
I would be happy to if you'll have me. Thank you very much. Here's where I overstayed my welcome. Sorry. Last question.
You mentioned kids. Do your kids ever ask you to write something for them?
Yeah, well, I like when there's so many things I could get in trouble for here, so I have to consider this.
Is that why you have your lawyer here?
Yeah, exactly. My lawyer travels with me everywhere. I've worked with them. My oldest daughter wrote a book. There's this great thing, and it's a great toy that I'd recommend. You can go get it at a store where they give you all the pages for a book, and you can write a story with them, or they can write a story, and you mail it in, and they bind it and send it back. And so that's been really fun. But no, they're not, as I mentioned earlier, they're not very interested in the things that I write. Really boring books about pictures. Well, thank you all very much for having me.